Business logic, basically there is nothing called business logic in Salesforce as such, but there are quite a few concepts which are collectively called as business logic when we are talking about Developer 401 exam. So this section basically comprises of formulas, putting formulas into the database. Second is the validation rules, okay, creating the validation rules to validate the data. Third is workflow rules. Workflow rules is something which can be defined to automate some stuff, based on some action which happens on based on some DML operation on the data. You can perform certain actions. So that is the workflow rule. And the approval process. Now, what is this approval process thing? Approval process is where you try to define a sequence of actions which take care of an approval process. Let's say there is some thing which needs to be taken approval for, and you want to automate that process. Usually what happens for an approval, there is a person who seeks approval, then that approval request needs to move to the person who is the approver, and the approver has to then finally approve or reject, and then again there is some action which happens. So this is a complete sequence of actions. Okay. So this approval process thing allows you to define an automated process for an approval, so that whenever there is an approval required, it can be automatically submitted through the system. Request can be sent, approval or rejection can be done. Based on that, some actions can be followed. So the entire thing can be done. Right. So these are the four things which.
Your voice is cracking up, Chief. I'm like, I can hear the half of the words and then half of the sentence.
Give me 1 minute. Okay, just give me a moment. Alright, so we are talking on the business logic section. So I was just telling you that there are four things that we are going to cover under business logics. One is formulas, second is validation rules, third is workflow rules, fourth is an approval process, right? So we'll discuss about all these things, in details, one by one. Now, formula is the first thing that we are going to talk about in today's session. So formula is simply a field type. Those of you who have created fields and who have gone to that new custom field and noticed, you might have seen a field type called formula, right? So formula is simply a field type. A field type where you can put a formula. What is a formula? Formula can take reference from some other field, or even without taking reference from some other field, you can just put a formula there. So this formula can be a completely independent formula, or this formula might take a reference from some other field and do some calculation and put the value into this field. A quick example for that can be tax. If you are selling some product and you want to associate a service tax with it, so this tax is something which needs to be calculated on the actual price of the product, right, or whatever the billing information that you feed in. So let's say you have a field called amount. Whatever you put in the amount, based on that the tax should be calculated. For example, your tax is 15%. So now every time you don't need to go and calculate manually, you can just put tax as a formula field and you can just mention it as 15% of the amount. That's it. So once you write the formula, Salesforce will keep on calculating and keep on updating the values. Okay. So these kind of things. this will be taken care of by formula. So it's a field type basically, and we can define that field. So let's get into that and see how it's created and all. Alright, so we have this opportunity object here. We already have this object, so what we're gonna do, we will create a formula field here on the opportunity object for an example. So I already have an amount field here, right? It's a standard field. Now in case I am also required to have a tax field, and tax will be 15% of the amount. How do I do that? How do I create the tax field? Do I always do the calculation myself manually and then put the value? No, that's not the correct approach. So I just have to go and create a formula field. It's very simple. You know where to go for creating fields, right? So just go and click on customize, and after that go to opportunities, go to fields, and click on new. Now field type, pick it as formula. Okay, formula should be your field type. Then go to next. Select tax here. What will be the return type after the calculation? It will be currency. You have the option of making it 0 decimal places. So tax will also be currency, right? So made it currency. Go to next. Now this is where you have to put the formula. So what is the formula? 15% of amount, right? So you just come to advanced formula. Okay. Click on the insert field. So you can click on insert field to insert a field from here. Now you want to insert amount field, you want to take a reference from there, insert it. If you know the name of the field, it's fine. If you don't know, use this insert field option. So tax equals to what? It is equals amount into 0.15. That is the tax, right? Here we have that. Amount into 0.15. You can do a quick syntax check here. No syntax errors in merge fields or functions. So which means it's absolutely fine. Done. Go to next, save the file. Save the field. Fine. Now if you go to an existing opportunity, or in case you create a new opportunity, you will see the field tax, which has been automatically calculated to 15%. Here it is, which is 15% of this entire thing. Okay, so this is a simple formula. This is how you can actually put formula. Now you have the option of putting pretty complex formulas and make your system or make things easier for the end users wherever possible. So you can enhance the formulas and you can put certain logics through these formulas. For example, I'm just taking a simple example again. Let's say the tax calculation is not that simple. The tax calculation is if the amount is from 0 to 100,000, it should be a 10% tax, and for anything which is more than that, it should be 20% tax. For the amount 0 to 100,000, tax is 10%. For amount more than that, tax is 20%. So we just have to go and edit the formula here. So just go to that formula field and edit it. So now we will need a function here. So which function I need? I need a logical function. Which logical function? If. So I have to put an if function here. If amount, you can insert operators from here also if you are not aware of some operator. If amount is less than 100,000, then okay, then the tax will be equals amount into 0.1, else tax will be equals to okay. So this is what we have. We have just 3 sections of this complete thing. One is the logical test. Second is what happens if the test result is true. Third is what if the test result is false. So if the test is true, this, if the test is false, this, and here is the test. No syntax errors in merge fields or functions. Save it. Now for any opportunity where the amount is less than 100,000, it is gonna calculate it as 10% of tax. And for any opportunity where it is more than 100,000, the tax will be 20%. Here it is more than 100,000, 235,000. So the tax is 20%. If I edit and make it 50,000, it becomes 10%, right? So these formulas are very useful. A lot of things can be automated because what happens is most of the times in business there are certain logics which can be used. Some fields data can be referenced to calculate the other field, not just for this tax and amount, for other things also. For example, you have start date and end date of the campaign, right? And whenever you have particular type of campaign. Let's say you have a logic that this type of campaign always kind of ends in 2 or 3 days. For example, 3 days is the standard timeline for a particular type of campaign. Let's say whenever you do a trade show, the campaign always is for 3 days. Okay, so you can have a formula populated for the end date. The moment you put the start date, it will automatically calculate the end date. The same way, if you are putting agreements in place, contracts in place. So contract start date you put and the contract end date can be calculated. See, 2-3 days calculation manually also can be done. But if you have a contract of let's say 100 days, now for someone to sit manually and calculate, from today after 100 days which date will be that, it will be difficult, right? So that time it becomes easier for you to populate these kind of things. So a lot of these kind of things can be done. For text, you can have formulas for your mathematical calculations, for your logical things, as we saw, for the date calculations, right? So formula can be very helpful. It can be a very effective thing which can help companies increase or enhance their productivity or efficiency. Correct? Alright. Now moving on to the next thing. Which is the validation rule. Okay, so validation rules, this is a rule basically, like formula was a field type, validation rule is a rule. Now, validation rules help improve data quality. By preventing users from saving incorrect data. So validation rule basically does not allow the incorrect data into the system. So you have an option of defining criteria for your data validation, and before a record is saved into the system, the data is checked for that whatever rule you have defined, and it does not allow the data to be saved if the criteria that you have defined is not met. For example, let's say you do not want to take any opportunity which is less than 10,000 in amount. Any opportunity for which amount is less than 10,000, you do not want to save that opportunity. You don't want that opportunity to be allowed to be saved. So this can be logic. So anytime someone is trying to enter an opportunity with an amount which is less than 10,000, it will not allow that person to save it, because that is where the data validation will happen. Validation rules verify that the data a user enters in a record meets the standards you specify before the user can save the record. Okay, so it checks for the criteria before the record is saved. A validation rule can contain a formula or an expression. Okay, so that rule is defined using a formula expression that evaluates the data in one or more fields and returns a value true or false. Validation rules also include an error message to display to the user when the rule returns a value of true due to an invalid value. So validation, how is that rule defined? Rule is defined using a formula expression. If the value of that expression is true, then validation throws the error message. So you have to define validation rule in such a way that if the value to the expression is true, then validation rule will throw the error message. Error message also we will define. So defining a validation rule is pretty simple. You just have to go to setup, customize and all these things. Select the validation for standard objects. For custom object, you just have to go to setup, create objects, select the object, and under that you will see the validation rule. You will select that. Okay. Now there are two things which you actually have to define in the validation rule. One is the error criteria, the rule actually, and one is the error message. If something does not, some data which is not validated, then what is the error message that it should throw? So let's go and see. So I'll take this example that I was talking about, that opportunity amount less than 10,000 should not be allowed, right? So it's pretty simple. Go to setup, customize opportunities, amount, validation rules. So once you go here on opportunities, then go to fields. You will see validation rules here. Click on the validation rules. Create a new validation rule. Okay, so give it a name. So this is my error criteria, error condition, right? Amount less than 10,000. This condition should throw error whenever amount is less than 10,000. So here it will throw the error. You can define the error. $10,000 or 100,000. Okay, so amount, anytime when it finds amount less than 10,000, this is the error message which it's going to throw. That's it. Save it. You just have to make sure that your validation rule is active. So why do we have this option of making the validation rule active or inactive? So that sometimes if you just want to allow some data to be entered into the system and not follow the validation rule thing, you can simply click on this active. Click on save. So your validation rule is ready. Now let's go and try to create a record into the system. Opportunities, new. You see this, less than 10,000 it throws an error, right? So because the validation rule is active now, it is working fine. In case you make it inactive, then the rule will not work. So sometimes you might want to enter some data into the system which does not follow the rule, but still sometimes it happens, right? You want to define some exception maybe there is a sale going on, so end of the year sale, and that time you just want to take any opportunity whatever comes to you. So that is where you can just deactivate the validation rule, and then make your entries and again activate the validation rule, right? So that's about our validation rule. Now, what we understand from here, that validation rule, to define good validation rule, you need to be good in formulas, right? Because the error criteria is to be defined using the formula. Alright. So if you are good in formula, if you understand the formulas pretty well, you will be able to define good validation rules also. Validate the data properly and define the validation rule based on certain conditions and all those things. For example, now let me take a little different kind of a scenario where okay, now let's say this, the company does not have a fixed amount, a minimum amount slab. They have a minimum amount based on the industry, okay, and they want to just define a logic saying that if the industry is, if it's an energy industry, then the minimum amount should not be less than 20,000, okay. So how will we define that logic in the validation, right? That can be a logic, right? That from energy industry, we would not receive any opportunity which is less than 20,000. The minimum opportunity that we can receive from an account from energy industry is 20,000, right? All right. So we have to go and put that logic. So go to opportunities and then go to your validation rules. Okay. So industry is not a field on the opportunity directly, right? It's a field on account. So you have to select opportunity then account. So where you see this kind of a mark at the end, which means it is a parent object, and you can still go ahead and browse fields from the parent object. So you can go to account, and in account you will find industry, right? Where it is? Here it is. So there are two criteria which should be met. So we need to put an AND logic here. Industry equals energy and What is the other logic that we are putting? Amount less than 20,000. Do a syntax check. Throws error. Okay. The error is that this needs to be converted into text. No error. That's fine. So there are two logics that I've put. First logic, this is equals energy, the industry of the account, and the amount is less than 20,000, then it should throw error. This rule is active. Click on save. Go to opportunities, pick an amount, pick an account from energy industry. So I know that this account is from energy industry, so that is the reason why I put this one. Put 18,000. See, for any opportunity from energy industry, amount cannot be less than 20,000. Got this? So practice more on the formulas, that will help you write good formulas as well as good validation rules. And trust me on this, there is a lot of automation which can be done on the systems using the formulas and validation. I mean, a lot of things can be automated, and so that helps the company in two ways. One, they help, these formulas and validations helps you save a lot of time and help you protect the quality of the data, so make it, a good quality data and all. Alright, so the next thing that we will get into is the workflow rule. Okay. Before I go into workflow rule, we have talked about validation rules. So let's see one or two sample validation rules here. So one sample validation rule is account number must be numeric if not blank. So if you have a field called account number, it should be numeric if it is not blank. So see, if account number is blank and is not number, not is number, then throw error. Fine. So you can have a lot of these kind of validation rules. Spend some time on the formulas and all, and you can learn this validation rules pretty well. Okay, so now moving on to the workflow rules. Okay, so let's understand what is a workflow rule actually. Many of the tasks you normally assign, the emails you regularly send, and some record updates are part of your organization's standard process, right? So some emails being sent, or some of the tasks which are being assigned to the people, or some records which are being updated. So some of these tasks are, regular things, and some of them have a very clearly defined logic. What we have to understand is there a clearly defined logic behind a task that you do? Let's say, you send an email to a new inquiry. Whenever the inquiry comes, you send an email to that. Okay. So there is a very clear logic behind it, that whenever a record is created, you send the email, right? Or whenever you get a new inquiry, you assign a task to a sales rep. Now that is also pretty logical, right? That okay, fine. Logical, when I say, I mean, is there a clearly defined logic which computer can understand? So that is what we have to understand. There will be two types of activities in this system. One is a completely objective kind of activity, that okay, if this happens, this needs to be done. And there are certain activities where, manual intervention is required, and the person who is doing it needs to decide whether he needs to do A or B, something like that. So any such activity where we are talking about doing the task in terms of, as a standard process based on some other activity which has happened, that can be automated. So that is what we are talking about here. Many things are, done in your organization as standard process based on some criteria, right? And that criteria can be easily defined. So those things can be automated. So we'll talk about that. Instead of doing this work manually, you can configure workflow to do it automatically. So instead of you doing this manually every time, you always have that option of configuring a workflow which can do the entire stuff automatically. So workflow automates the following types of actions. So what all actions, now your next question would be that what all actions can be automated through workflow? Workflow automates the following types of action based on your organization's process. It can automate the task assignment, assign a new task to a user. Email alerts, it can send an email to one or more recipients you specify. Automated emails can be sent, automatically tasks can be assigned. Fields can be updated automatically, and outbound messages can be sent. Okay. You can send a secure configurable API message in XML format to a designated listener. So outbound messages can be sent. So if you want to send some data from your system to the other system, that is something which can be done. Alright, so there are 4 types of actions which you can do in workflow. Assign a task to a user automatically, send email, field update some field on the object, or you can send an outbound message. So here we go about the workflow rule defining. Each workflow rule consists of a rule criteria. So you have to define the rule criteria, whatever it is. Determines when Salesforce executes the workflow rule. Any change that causes a record to match this criteria can trigger the workflow rule, right? So rule criteria is basically the criteria when the rule should be executed. Evaluation criteria determines when the workflow should be executed. Okay. So one is the rule, one is the evaluation. And then the actions. So before actions, understand the difference between rule criteria and evaluation criteria. Evaluation criteria is when do you want the rule to be evaluated? Do you want the rule to be evaluated when a record is being created, or do you want the rule to be evaluated when a record is being updated? When, okay. So that is the evaluation criteria. Based on your evaluation criteria, only when you define the rule to be evaluated, then only it will be evaluated to check the rule criteria. Got it? So for example, if I say that evaluate the rule only when a new record is being created, don't evaluate it when an existing record is being updated. So then what will happen? Your rule will be checked only when new record is being entered into the system. Got that thing? Then immediate actions of the workflow. So actions, what all 4 actions can be done, I have shown you just now, the previous slide. Actions, immediate actions are the actions to take when workflow rule executes. Time dependent actions that Salesforce queues when the workflow rule executes. So time dependent action can be delayed actions. Let's say you don't want to perform an immediate action, you want to perform an action after 3 hours. So those are the time dependent actions. Okay. So this is it. So in workflow rule, you simply have to define a rule, criteria, evaluation criteria, immediate action, time dependent action. Fine. Now let's take a simple example. For the opportunity object itself, we will talk. We'll take the example of opportunity and define a workflow rule where the system should send an automated email to the owner of the opportunity if amount of the opportunity is more than 500,000. Right? Any opportunity which is entered into the system which is more than 500,000, you want to send an automated email to the owner saying that, hey, this is a very big opportunity, please take good care of this opportunity. Fine. So let's go and define it. To define a workflow rule, you just have to go to setup and then go to create workflow and approvals, then go to workflow rules. Then click on continue. New rule. For which object are we planning to define the workflow rule? For opportunity. Right? Select this, click on next. Then pick a rule name, or define a rule name, whatever. 500 opportunity alert. Yeah, can you see now? Okay. So for those who missed it, please click on setup and then create, and then workflow and approvals, click on workflow rules. Fine. Then click on continue here. Create a new rule. Which object you want to use for this rule? Opportunity. Select your opportunity object, go to next. Then click on this, give it a name. Okay, so define the evaluation criteria. Now there are 3 evaluation criteria options which are available. Do you want the rule to be evaluated when a new record is being created? Do you want the rule to be evaluated when a new record is created and every time it is edited? Or the third option, created and any time it's edited to subsequently meet criteria. So these 3 options are there. Alright. Now in these 3 options you have to decide which option you want to pick. Alright. So let me pick the third one. Created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet criteria, which means only when it is edited to meet the criteria. Sometimes it will be edited, but still after edit it does not meet the criteria, or even before edit it was meeting the criteria. Fine. But if it meets the criteria at that point of time when, on that particular edit, subsequently it meets the criteria, then we will want this rule to be evaluated. Okay. Now this is where my rule criteria will be. My criteria is what? Amount is greater than 500,000. Click on save and next. Alright. Now the rule is defined. You have given it a name, you have defined the rule criteria, and you have also defined the evaluation criteria. So everything is done. Now what is the next thing which we have to do here? We just have to go and define the action. Okay, so you see there are 2 types of action: immediate action, time dependent action. So for immediate action, that will happen immediately when the record is updated or created. Time dependent action, you have an option of delaying the action. Okay, so in time dependent action, what you can do, you can define a time trigger and delay your action based on the time trigger. Let's say you define a time trigger for 2 days after the rule trigger. So then what you can do, now you have defined a time trigger for 2 days, you can define certain actions which will happen after 2 days. So that is the thing here. Alright, let me put an immediate action. What action are we talking about? We want an email alert, automated email to be sent to the opportunity owner. So I'll send new email alert. Just give it a description and a name and email template you have to pick. So this is where we will require the email templates that we learned yesterday, right? So you should design the email template, keep it. Let me say, let's pick this email template. I do not know what exactly this is, but I'll pick it. And so you should define your email template, which can be used here for sending automated emails. Who should receive it? Now recipient you can select. We said that the owner should receive it, right? So opportunity owner should be the recipient. You have option of selecting the recipient from the users and from the parent field. So there are different options which are available. I simply say that okay fine, let the opportunity owner be the recipient here. That's it. You can also put a few emails to be copied on this. Okay. So your rule is defined, action is also defined. Done. Now you just have to go and activate the workflow rule. Fine, you have defined the rule, criteria, everything. You have defined the action also, immediate action, email alert to be sent to the owner of the opportunity. Everything is defined now. The only thing that you have to do here is go and activate the rule. Workflow rule is by default not activated. You have to activate it. If you activate it, then only it will work. Okay. Activate the rule. Now go and create a new opportunity. Okay, the rule is activated now. Now if you go and create a new opportunity, or if you just take all the opportunities and edit one of those, let's say so I've created a big opportunity with 600,000 amount. Now ideally I should receive an email, right? Because I am the owner here for this record. So let's see if we have received the email or not. Just give me a minute. Let me go back and check in my email. So don't go by what is written in the email body, because that is something which came from the default template that we picked up. So you could have defined any template there, but you have received the email. So that is how it is working, which is fine. Got this thing? Workflow rule, easy, simple to understand. So there are just a few things which you need to understand. One is define the rule criteria, define evaluation criteria, and then define the action, activate it. That's it. And this kind of thing can help you reduce a lot of your daily activities. You know, things you do every day, those things can be reduced easily. Okay. So now we will go into our approval process, right? So we'll talk about approval process now. We have talked about formulas, validations and workflow rules. Before we go to approval process, we'll just break for 5 minutes and then connect back. Fine. Let's get started on the approval process now. So we have understood about workflow rules. We have talked about workflow rules. We have seen how workflow rule works. Now, for the approval process, it is just an extension of a workflow rule. Fine. In workflow rule, what happens? There is certain criteria that you have defined. Based on the criteria, you have defined certain action, right? However, in approval process, your automation does not end there. Your actions do not end at one particular criteria or something. You have to take it to next level, or 2-3 steps are there which need to be done there for an approval process. For example, for workflow, what we are doing, certain criteria is met, we send an email, end of the story. Fine. However, for approval process, what we have to do, we have to, based on some criteria, we will have to send the record for approval, right? So we have to send it to the approver. So that Salesforce will automatically do. We do not have to worry about that. But what we have to worry about is, when this request is sent to the approver will either approve or reject it. Now, based on his approval or rejection, we again have to define actions. That if this guy approves, then what happens? If he rejects, then what happens, right? So that is what we actually have to look into. So approval process is something where you will have multiple actions at different stages. So this is not something as simple as workflow, that you will just have one set of actions and your workflow rule is done. In approval process, you will have multiple sets of actions in different stages. So what are the stages which we are talking about? We are talking about a submission stage. Submission is when the record is submitted for approval. Then then the other stage is if the record is approved by the approver. The third stage can be if the record is rejected, if it is not approved. Then one more stage can be if the submitter wants to recall the record. You have submitted something for approval, but you want to recall. When you recall, then what should happen, right? So there are different actions which need to be defined at different stages. Alright. Okay. So when we go about the approval process, let us understand a little more about approval process. An approval process is an automated process your organization can use to approve records in Salesforce. An approval process specifies the steps necessary for a record to be approved and who must approve it at each step. Right? So this has the steps as well as the person who will approve. I mean, basically the approver. So you just don't have to define the steps. You also have to define the approver. Who will be the approver? An approval process also specifies the actions to take when a record is approved, rejected, recalled, or first submitted for approval. Right? So as I told you, you have to define actions for each of these steps. And you have to define the approver also. So it's more like a workflow rule, not too much different. The actions are the same, the ones that you have in workflow, that task assignment, email alert, field update, and your outbound message. Right. So these 4 actions are there. These are the actions which are available in approval process also, but the difference between the workflow and approval is, for approval process you have to define an approver, you have to select an approver who will be the approver. Second thing you have to do is you have to define things at each of these stages. Fine. So that's about approval process. So approval process includes the name and the description and all. So let's go and define an approval process. And see what we need to define. So difference between the workflow and approval that we can understand now is that in workflow you just have to define one set of actions and you do not have to select an approval or something, right? Here you will have to define the approval and you will have to define actions at each stage. When the record is submitted for approval, when it is rejected, if it is approved, if it is recalled, right? So let's go and create the approval process. Okay, so we'll create an approval process. Just give me a moment, one moment. Okay, so let's define an approval process here now. It's very simple process that we are going to define. Let's say for approval process we want to approve all the opportunities. Let me think of, okay. So let's say any opportunity which is less than 50,000 in the amount. For any opportunity where the amount is less than 50,000, you need an approval. Okay. So you need an approval that shall we take this opportunity or not. So this could have been order or anything. When we are just working on opportunity object today. So let's take this example. Any opportunity where the amount is less than 50,000 needs an approval. Okay. So first thing that we'll do is I'll create a field, approval status field on opportunity, and we will update the status of that field using our field update function, field update action that we are talking about, right? We will use that action. So first of all, let me go and create a field on the opportunities object. Let me create a pick list field here. Approval status. Right. Status can be pending or approval, approved, recalled. So these can be the actions, right? Pending for approval. These can be the status of the approval. Either the approval, the record is pending for approval, or it has been approved, it has been rejected, or recalled. Okay. Go to next. Then click on visible. Click on next. Save. So this opportunity record is this field we have created, it is saved into this system. Now I will control this approval status field through my approval process logic. So let's go and define the approval process. So go to setup, create approval process, workflows and approvals, approval process. In approval process, what you have to do, you just have to go and define which object you want to use here, opportunity. Go and click on Jumpstart Wizard, start defining the approval process, give it a name, approval for small opportunities. Give it any name, whatever you feel like. It asks you to give the name of the email template in case you want to define your own custom email template for approval assignment. This is the email which will be sent to the approver. The approver will receive this email. So in case you have created a separate template for that, it's fine. If you do not have, you don't need to create. By default, Salesforce will send an email template. So Salesforce has a default template which it sends if you do not have a custom one. If you have a custom one, send that. Okay. Now what is my criteria? Very simple, amount is less than 50,000. This is the criteria. Okay. So criteria is defined. Next thing you have to, so you can define whatever criteria you have. If you have other logics also to put here, put it in the criteria. So here we just have one simple criteria which is called as entry criteria. So only the records which meet this entry criteria can go for the approval, will be can be submitted for approval. Right. So only the records which are less than 50,000 in amount will be allowed to go for approval. Right. So that's fine. I've defined my entry criteria. Now the next thing that I have to do is select the approver. Now you have to pick the approver. Who should be the approver? So for selecting the approver, you will simply go and say who should be the approver. So you have a few options. You can give it to the submitter. Okay, the person who is submitting the record can select the approver manually. Some cases that can be required. Other case, automatically assign it to an approver based on some hierarchy field. Someone if you have managers defined for every user, then you can send it to the manager or someone. Third option is automatically assigned to some user. Let me use this option. So you also have an option of defining it or sending it to a given user, that okay, these approval requests should go to this user. So I define this user Jeet Singh to receive these requests. That's fine. Click on save. Okay. So first part is done. Entry criteria has been defined, approver has been defined. The only thing which is left is to define the actions. But as I told you, you do not have one set of actions here, you have multiple set of actions. You have to define actions for initial submission, you will have to define actions for final approval, for final rejection, for recall, for everything you have to define actions, right? What action do we want to do here? We want to update the field. So for initial submission, I'll do a field update. See, initial submission, add new action, field update. Which field you want to update? Approval status. I want this field to be updated to pending for approval. So whenever the record is submitted for approval, this field should get updated to pending for approval. Done. Along with this, you can send an email also if you want. So email alert can also be sent. So, but I don't want to send any email in this. I just want to control the field update. Final approval action means when the record is approved. When the record is approved, then I want to, sorry, not email alert. Then I want to go and update the same field. Which field do we want to update? Make it approved. Final rejection action. In that I will update the same field, make it rejected. Fine. Same way you can define an action for recall also. So anytime the record is recalled, if the person who submitted recalls it back, then what will happen? Alright, so all the actions, all 4 actions have defined for each stage. I have just defined the field update for each of these steps, right? So when it's initially submitted for approval, the field should get updated to submitted for pending for approval. When it's approved, it should get approved. When the record is rejected, the field should get updated as rejected. When it's recalled, the field should get updated as recalled, right? So I'm just controlling this field through this approval process. Now once this part is done, it's always a very good habit. I mean, if you have to master the skills of approval process, you need to get into the habit of, because there are quite a few things that we are doing here, right? You have defined quite a few things. So if you just want to go and have a quick summary of what you actually have done and how the process looks, you can just click on the view diagram part. So if you start looking into the diagrams, you will understand your approval processes a little better and you will be able to create better approval processes. Right? See, this is the entry criteria. If it meets, then the approval process starts. Okay. After that, either it will go for initial submission and it can also be recalled. After submission also it can be recalled, right? So for recall, there is an action. Initial submission is the other option. So after initial submission, either it will go to approved or rejected. So this is the action for approved, this is the action for rejected. This is how it is, right? So this is a simple small approval process. It can become longer. So if you are into the habit of looking into the diagrams and understanding the process, this will help, right? Now you just have to go and click on activate. Click on OK. That's it. So your approval process is activated. Now you just go and create a new opportunity. Fine. The record got saved. Now approval process will not start automatically. Basically this meets the rule criteria, right? Less than 50,000. That is what my rule entry criteria was. It meets the entry criteria, but approval process does not start automatically like the workflow rule. Workflow rule does not need anything. It automatically gets started, right? That is where we define the evaluation criteria, created or updated. So based on that evaluation criteria, it automatically triggers. Approval process needs a manual intervention. Here someone has to manually go and click on submit for approval. Got it? Once you submit this record for approval, you might not be able to edit it or recall it. That's fine. Submit it for approval. Now once you click on that submit for approval, that is where your approval process starts. Okay, so the moment I clicked on submit for approval, see, automatically the approval status got updated to pending for approval. This is the first step in the submission. The other thing which happens while you submit a record for approval is the record gets logged. See, why the record gets logged? Because it has been submitted for approval. Till the time the approver does not reject it, or till the time it is not recalled, this record will be locked, so that you cannot make any changes after once you have submitted it for approval. Now this is the thing. Let's see what kind of an email has been received by the approver. Okay, I told about this, that Salesforce by default will send an email. So they have this thing, approval request. See, this has requested your approval on the following item. So the approver can click on this link and then approve or reject the record. Got it? Record is there. Submitter will have to click on submit for approval. The approver will automatically receive this kind of an email. He will receive a link in that email. Can click on that link and then approve or reject the record. That is it. So if you are not logged in, then let's say right now I'm logged in into the system, into my Salesforce. But if I was not logged in, it would have taken me to the login page and it would have asked for my login ID password. I put. So when I click on the link, it takes me to the login page. I put login ID password. It takes me to this screen, and then I have to approve or reject the record. So it's a very small opportunity and I reject it. Now the moment the record has been rejected, you will see approval status automatically got updated to rejected. Got this? And here in approval history also you will get to see these things, that this is what happened. Initially it was submitted for approval, then it got rejected on this date at this time. Overall status is rejected. Now you might make certain other changes. Let's say it's 45,000. Now you have the option of editing it. So make it 48,000 and then resubmit it for approval. Same process, same thing will be done. Done, and then you can submit it for approval again. Same process will follow. The approval will receive an email again. See, again I received an email. Requested your approval for the following item. Again the same process, go to the link. This time I feel okay, this is fine. 48,000 is okay. What I can do is, now it looks, just put a comment in case you want, and approve it. Correct. So if you approve, the record still remains locked. Why it remains locked? So that someone is not able to change the data in the approved record, right? Otherwise, what will happen? For example, you are getting your leaves approved by your manager. You got your leave approved for 3 days. While you submitted the request, at that time it was 3 days. Your manager approved a leave of 3 days. After that is approved, if you are able to edit the record, then what will happen? You can, after your leave has been approved for 3 days, you can edit it and make it 7 days, right? So that's to avoid that kind of situations. Something which is rejected, that gets opened, so you can make changes and submit for approval again. But if it gets approved, then it remains locked. Got it? Simple. It's approval process thing. Now, in this approval process, you have the scope of making it a bit, longer, or you have the scope of making it a bit complex. So that is something which can be done. But initially, you need to start with a simple approval process. So once you understand the simple approval process, then you can make it a multi-step approval process also. So you might have noticed that while we were creating the approval process, I'll show it to you. We had an option of adding steps also. See, approval steps. So this is a one step. You have the option of adding multiple step approval process. So that is something which can be done, right? So that is where you can define that, okay, first step it should go to this user, and then if it is approved from this user, it should go to the other user for approval. So that sort of things can be defined. Correct? Oh, that is how our approval process can work. All right. So clear on this approval process. There is another thing which I would talk on the approval process, which is this slide. Now I talked about multiple steps. So how many actions and all these things can be done on an approval process? Let's understand this part. So for an approval process, it includes the following elements. So what all elements are there in an approval process? Name and description to distinguish it from other approval processes. That is something which we have just seen. Entry criteria, if you only want records with certain attributes to be included. So entry criteria for the approval, that is something which we define. However, this entry criteria is not mandatory. You do not have to give an entry criteria. We just define an entry criteria that only the opportunities which have amount less than 50,000. But you always can skip that step. So if you do not define any entry criteria, then you can put any record for approval. Okay, so that is the advantage that you will have. A designated user who can approve requests. So you will have to define the approver. Settings to specify who, if anyone, can change a record once it has been submitted for approval. So that is more of an admin stuff, that if anyone can change the records once it has been submitted for approval. So most of the times administrator is the person who can actually change the records even after it has been submitted for approval. Any number of steps that define the sequence of actions to take when a record matches the criteria, right? So then define your actions. Okay. Each step in approval process can have up to 40 actions. So we are talking about multiple actions here. Now how many actions can we do in an approval process? Each step can have up to 40 actions, 10 of each type. Okay. Email alert, field update, task and outbound message. Fine. Up to 40 additional actions that occur when a record is initially submitted, 40 actions that occur when a record is approved, 40 actions that occur when a record is rejected. Got it? So each step in the approval process can have 40 actions. That initial submission thing can have 40 actions. When it is approved, there can be 40 actions. And when it is rejected, there can be 40 actions. And when the record is recalled, at that time also you can have 40 actions. Got it? So if you look into here, for this initial submission, you can define 40 actions, 10 of each type. For final approval, you can define 40. For rejection, you can define 40. For recall, you can define 40 actions, right? And in the approval steps, if you have multiple steps of approval, for each step of approval process, you can define 40. Like this is step 1, right? So for each step of approval process, you can define 40 actions. So that is how it is. So 40 is the number of actions that can be defined in these stages as well as in each of the steps in the approval process. Clear? Okay. So that is about our approval process.